I'm hoping the Big Ten has to modify their system for us.
Probably like getting grade 10 sandpaper rubbed on your face every day.
I mean, we say it all the time, whether, there's two types of turds. You're a sinker or you're a floater, but you're still a turd, right? I
mean, we are about players and players playing the plays and not necessarily the plays.
Welcome to the Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. You're hearing us early this week because Nebraska football is playing a day early. They're playing on Friday, so you're hearing this podcast on Thursday. I think his podcast is also going Thursday. I haven't asked him. I should have asked him ahead of time, but podcasting counterpart Brandon Vogel is joining me this week, host of the I-80 preview podcast. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, remaining on the usual schedule for that. So that podcast, I-80 preview podcast, does hit on Thursdays. So look for that ahead of Rutgers. Shortened time frame, less time to listen this week.
Well, I do not have a Rutgers guest for this week. The short turnaround made getting a Rutgers guest difficult, so we will not have somebody previewing their side. But you should always be listening to the I-80 preview podcast so you can still get a Rutgers preview from Brandon. Joining us also is Erin Sorensen, half of the dynamic duo behind the Mind Your Own podcast. Erin, how are you?
Good. I thought you were going to give me a lead in by basically saying like you weren't able to get somebody to preview Rutgers, so you invited me because, as we know, I am just a wealth of knowledge on the Rutgers football team. It's just if you're going to talk to me about anything other than Nebraska football, it would obviously be Rutgers football. So I just figured that was where you were going with that.
How does Rutgers secondary look?
Great.
Panic
could be better. Let me regurgitate whatever Matt Lubick said today. It'll be a real test.
Erin, Taylor Swift on Twitter quote tweeted something talking about her new album thing that came out. With a Dwight Schrute gif. And then Rainn Wilson responded to it on Twitter. And then Taylor Swift responded to Rainn Wilson. And so I think now I have to be a fan of Taylor Swift. Is it okay if I jump on the bandwagon this late?
It's totally fine. I sent you somebody made an album cover with Dwight Schrute, and you never responded to me about it. So I just assumed you either hated it or it was the greatest thing you've ever seen.
No, I saw it. I have yet to respond to it. I will do it once we get out of the Zoom lobby. But so I saw that, and then I saw it was one of those what's happening things on my Twitter timeline that, like the bar off to the side, and it was Taylor Swift replies to Rainn Wilson. And I was like, is this the thing that Erin sent me? Like, Did the two of them see it? But it wasn't. But it's still, It was an interaction between Taylor Swift and Dwight Schrute. So it seemed like it was a colliding of two worlds.
She's
might have to be a Taylor Swift
on
fan.
Twitter right now. Yeah, she's in if you are somebody who is more of a not quite the pop loving Taylor Swift, this is definitely it's taken a different direction. So I did make Brandon listen to one song. He might tell you he hates it. I don't really care.
I didn't hate it, but the thing is someone who doesn't listen to pop music a lot, I go to Taylor Swift because I want pop music. Like if I just want, I listen to Bon Iver and The National enough.
That you didn't need
on
that.
Their own, that I don't need Taylor Swift's version of it.
Yeah. I did. So Brandon, Derek, I promise not to completely derail your podcast with Taylor Swift, but there's a reason for this.
I brought it up. I opened the door.
You did. But I will say the one thing that the two of you are very good at is you are both very good at looking at statistics and breaking into the numbers. So at some point I'm going to need to share this with you because on these two albums that she shared, Folklore and Evermore, people are trying to understand what percentage of a band has to be featured on a song for them to get a credit because, for instance, Mumford & Sons is not credited on the new album except for one of the singers is, in fact, in one of the songs. But The National was not credited in the first album, but now that they have a certain percentage, just long story short, I'll have to give you the number so you two can figure out, somebody figured out it's like 66.7% of the band has to be available for them to be credited on the album. Feels like feels like a good stat number to dive into. And you wonder why. Is she just really into like the statistics of it? Maybe. I don't know.
You definitely want to make sure you don't miss any residual checks from Taylor Swift album from working on that. It's important. I'm assuming that adds up.
It does, I'm sure.
The credit or no credit thing on like writing or like featuring or whatever. I don't pay enough attention to this stuff to really know one way or the other, but it's kind of fascinating to me who credits other people in their music and who doesn't.
And it has to be like something about working out between labels and all of that stuff, because if anybody has spent a little bit of time with if you're a fan of Taylor Swift at all, she's really outspoken about people getting paid correctly for their work and their effort and their time and everything. So I'm guessing she doesn't like inadvertently leave somebody off of the credit line unless they're saying like, I don't want that, or there's some reason that they can't be based on an album. But still, I do enjoy the Taylor Swift stats nerds on Twitter who are trying to figure out what that percentage is to be able to get featured on the album.
I assume it's a union thing, union negotiated, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah. Either way, I would like to point out that as a solo act, Brandon Vogel, 100% of my band is here. So Derek, I need to be credited for this podcast.
It will be the Varsity Club featuring Brandon Vogel, but Erin does not get a credit because, well, I guess you should, because I was going to say not 66.7%, but 100% is here because Sasha, who is your co-host, is producing for us.
She's physically in the room where it happens. Shout out to Hamilton.
Again?
So
Again.
I guess it'll have to be the Varsity Club podcast featuring Brandon Vogel, and then in double parentheses featuring, would it be Erin Sorensen and Sasha Durkin, or just Erin Sorensen?
Or just the cast of the Mind Your Own podcast. I don't know.
You guys are making this difficult for me. Let's talk Nebraska football. One of the things that we found out this week is that Colin Miller is not going to be playing football anymore. The press conference, or I guess the media availability, whatever you want to call it, the Zoom session that we had with Colin, he was kind of a surprise guest. He's talked to us before, I think one other time, since he got injured against Illinois, I think, but we were not expecting him, to talk to him on Tuesday. And then he kind of popped up and let everybody know that after speaking with a neurologist and getting some kind of feedback on the sort of like the long range effects of the spinal concussion that he suffered against Illinois, that it was in his best interest to medically retire from the game of football. We'll open it up to either of you guys. If there's anything that you want to say about Colin, anything you want to say about what we heard, his injury, anything like that, you have the floor now.
What a gut punch. I think that was like, when he started talking, I think we knew it was going one way or the other. Like, if he's going to come up to speak at this point, he's either telling us he's going to return for another year, or he's going to tell us that it's done. And you very quickly started to know which direction it was going. And my heart just sank, because I think Colin Miller handled that in a way, like, with such grace. He handled it in a way that so many others, like, I think of myself, if I was in his shoes, being sort of faced with the reality of this thing that I love, and this thing that in a lot of ways defines your life for a large, at least in most of these individuals' cases, it's been a part of their lives, their whole lives at this point. And to face the reality of the dreams and hopes and things that you had surrounding that now suddenly gone, to be in his shoes and to handle it and speak to it the way he did was phenomenal. And I don't take anything away from what he's probably feeling and will continue to feel. And I hope he allows himself to feel all of those things, because it has to be really hard. But I was telling Brandon this story before COVID-19 shut the world down. The last thing that I really did in person for Nebraska last spring was Pro Day. And I was sitting between Ben Stilley, he was on my left, and Colin Miller on my right. And Colin was just kind of, joking about hand sanitizer. And like, I remember like I had a little hand sanitizer and he was like trying to like jokingly barter with me about like how much I'd be willing to give him since like hand sanitizer was at premium then. But like, we're just sitting there talking, Ben, myself, and Colin, about this thing that was happening in front of us and, you know, in a year's time that they would be participating. And I think that's like, when I think about that moment, it's easy in hindsight now to like look at that moment like wistfully and be like, oh, think of like the gravity of that. But like, there wasn't any gravity in that moment. It was just, we're at pro day looking at what you would assumed a year from that point Colin would be participating in, and to think like in that time period how much has changed. And it really, it's like, it's just a reminder of I don't know, not to be overly sappy, but just to really appreciate, I guess, what you have at the time that you have it, because you really don't know what a year down the road is going to look like. And you know, knowing Colin and having had the chance to get to know him in the capacity that we did, I don't worry about him. He's going to be phenomenal in his lifetime, but it's still a gut punch just to kind of like think about that potential that was there. And now it's changed. The dream for him has changed and it will look different. And it's still a tough pill to swallow, even through the reality that it's probably for the best.
Yeah, that's all really well said, Erin. I don't have a ton new to add to that. Other than like you said, like if you're an athlete, it all ends for everyone at some point, and it's tough to see it end for a player like Colin this early. He was playing really, really well. You know, when you get to that level, when you get to a Power 5 level as a scholarship athlete, like, yeah, I think everybody thinks, oh, I'd love to keep playing. I would love to go to the next level. The thing that was really kind of heartbreaking in the moment to me was to hear him mention that, yes, he had those NFL aspirations as well. But playing at Nebraska, where there's so much interest in the Huskers, they're the only game in town. He mentioned that he felt like he got a little bit of the feel of what it's like to be at that level, to have that much attention just by playing college at Nebraska. And, you know, my heart kind of sunk for him a little bit in the moment. But as I returned to that in, you know, the couple of hours since he spoke, it makes me happy for him. And I think it really tells you kind of the perspective that a young man has at this stage. And that's really remarkable. And I think that's kind of what I'll always remember Colin Miller for, more than what he did for the Huskers. But he did a ton on that front too.
Yeah. And I will say it's been a weird season. And, you know, as we prepared for this season and getting ready to, I don't know, just go through it and lead the season with like as much normalcy as possible. I remember getting ready for that first game day, and the photo that was selected to sort of kick this season off was a photo of Colin Miller from our yearbook shoot 2 summers ago. And I'm so glad it was, because I feel like, you know, this year has been just shitty and terrible in so many ways and been hard for so many people. But, you know, I hope to look back on this season and remember some of the good, even through the bad. And I would say that one of the really good things was Colin Miller, even though it ended in the unfortunate way that he did. I hope that he can always look back on like what he was able to do, even in like the weirdest and hardest of times. So it's weird in hindsight to see that photo and be like, oh, that kicked off our season. But I'm glad that it did, because, you know, may this season always sort of be in his honor, as weird as it was.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting was we got to hear from Markel Dismuke Tuesday as well. He spoke before Colin Miller did, and somebody asked him about Colin Miller, and Markel's like a sneaky great person to talk to, in that he's really a no BS guy, and he just kind of says exactly what he's thinking. And he was like, yeah, I expected Colin Miller to be depressed. And he wasn't. And that was great for us. And he gave us a bunch of energy. And then to hear Colin come back and say kind of like he did that because he knew that they were going to give him energy and that they were going to help him out. That was kind of a cool moment, just hearing him talk about how, like, you know, because we'd heard from Chenander like a week or two ago, where Chenander had said that Colin was in the hospital, that Saturday, he spent the night in the hospital. And then that Monday morning, he was like early to the facilities, had a practice script in hand. He was going through stuff with the team, and he was there giving energy and everything like that. Then obviously, he traveled with the team for whatever the next road game was. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool in a tough moment. So we can move on from that. I appreciate what you both said. It was really well put. I won't keep blabbering on and ruin it. So I gave you guys one question that we were going to talk about because for all intents and purposes, the season is over. Brennan Hymas, Nebraska's starting left tackle, opted out of the Week 9 game against Rutgers. I don't really know how to like put this game into the season. I don't know, like, are you guys viewing this as a bowl game? Are you viewing this are you guys viewing this as like part of the regular season? Because in a normal year, we wouldn't have this +1 game. I am viewing it like the regular season is over. So I'm looking at the 7 games that Nebraska got to play. And kind of, I've already turned the page to 2021. I looked at the schedule. You guys know that I'm not a big like, oh, wow, the schedule's terrible person, but the schedule sucks. The offense, I was just kind of projecting earlier today before we got on this podcast and looking at it, like in terms of eligibility as the NCAA sees it, they're going to have a ton of freshman and sophomore kids all over the field in 2021, potentially. This could be a very young team playing a bear of a schedule. And I want to talk to you guys about the offense. Because the offense was, I'll say, enigmatic this year. A lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about the offense. A lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about where this thing is headed, what the long-range potential of this offense is, whether, somebody wrote a column about whether Scott Frost should give up play calling duties. We've talked about that. We had it asked in the mailbag. There's a lot of questioning of Scott Frost's sort of brainchild that he was supposed to bring to Nebraska as we kind of close out year 3. So the question that I posed to you guys, we'll just start kind of broadly. And if you want to narrow it down, we can. How do you fix the offense in 2021? Brandon, where do you want to start?
They need more explosive plays, which I don't like that as an answer, but when I look at it and really break down this offense, what it does well right now, what it doesn't do, that's the most glaring one to me. It's a little like, and this is the problem with it as a solution. It's a little like, if Fred Hoiberg's offense, they can't make threes, which again, it's like, okay, great. Well, make more. How do you do that? So Nebraska in 2018 had an explosive play percentage of 17.4%, 25th nationally. 2019, it dropped to 33rd, 16.8. This year it's at 14.1, 81%. So it's going the wrong direction. And I mention it just because my feeling from this offense, particularly these past 2 seasons, is that they basically have to scheme everything they get, and they still get a fair amount on offense. The points aren't there this year, but the success rate is, the yardage is better than you'd think for the amount of points Nebraska's scoring. There's just, they need to make some threes to keep it in basketball terms. Like, they need a 3 or 4 play drive occasionally. Everything needs to go 6, 7, 8, 9 plays. And it's just tough. And so how do they get those? I think it's they need to execute them better. I mean, how many times have we seen this season, particularly in the passing game, those plays are there to be had, and either Nebraska misses them in that they throw to the wrong guy, or they take a easier pass when there's a big shot downfield, or particularly in that Minnesota game, they just miss. Like, the pass is a little bit off, the receiver doesn't get there, whatever it is. They're 114th right now in explosive passing plays. It's just, they're getting nothing from that part of the game. And this offense isn't designed to work that way. So I think it comes down to execution first and foremost. They need to execute a little bit better. It's also a talent thing. And I don't think talent is much of an explanation for Nebraska's struggles so far in a broad sense, but at the skill position talent, particularly like the receivers they brought in to help address that, haven't broken out besides Wandel Robinson, who also is one of the running backs they trust most right now, which isn't how that is designed to work either. You think back to those UCF offenses and they had, 4, 5, 6 guys that you felt could go 60 yards at any time, like just get them some space, get the throw on the money or block it up front if it was a rushing play, and they would just go. And without that, this offense is going to have a really, really hard time.
Aaron, before I go to you, I want to ask Brandon a question about something that he just brought up, the length of drives. We've seen scoring drives in the last 2 games now. Purdue, the first drive of the second half was the 11-play, 75-yard drive. And then against Minnesota, they had a 13-play, 73 or 72-yard drive or something there in the second quarter that they scored on as well. Frost talked Monday of this week and said that that was when they were really cooking. And I think when we saw both of them live, we were thinking, okay, they're really cooking here. But is that an issue? Is it an issue that they have to go 13 plays, 11 plays? Now, they didn't have any negative plays on either of those 2 drives that I just mentioned. No negative plays. But it took them 11 and 13. And you've looked at numbers that say if you're going more than, 7 plays on a drive, the chance of scoring drops off pretty substantially.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that the chances, it does drop off a little bit, but I looked at this for the magazine, I think in November, and average touchdown drive, and this remains standard year to year. So it's kind of a fabric of football type of deal. Average touchdown drive, I think since 2018 has been 7 plays in college football, or the average scoring drive average touchdown drive comes down to about 6.5. And the average, if you end up with a field goal, it goes up over 7. So it kind of tells you where that's at. And the reason is that, these are still college offenses, for as many points and all of those things that we see across the game each week, each Saturday, it's likely they're going to screw up at some point. So going 13 plays to get a touchdown, yeah, great, you'll take it. But it's just a lot of, I call it exposure. It's like being out in the cold for too long. There's just a danger there. You're going to fumble it. You're going to throw an interception. You're going to have an incompletion on a key third down and those things in drives. So that's really a key part that Nebraska's missing. You want to be able to stay on the field and do those things. That's a good sign. I think of Iowa and Wisconsin when I think of teams that can do that. Northwestern's another one. Nebraska's not built to be that way, though. They need some of those 4 or 5 play touchdown drives, and they're just not getting them.
Aaron, let's go to you. Where do you start? What do you start with to try to correct some of these issues? Is it explosiveness with you? Where's your brain at?
Well, I can't speak to explosiveness like Brandon. That is his wheelhouse. So I'm not going to take the explosive plays. I think for me, and I've said this now to multiple people. I've said it on the Mind Your Own podcast with Sasha. If I had the answers, I would be making millions of dollars a year as Nebraska's coach. So I won't sit here and pretend that I know exactly how to fix this thing. But I think for myself, one area of improvement, and I don't know where this starts, because we aren't at practice. We don't get to see, for the most part, what's going on. I don't know who is and isn't exactly calling plays. So, how much of this needs to be addressed towards Frost and how much of it needs to go to Lubick, I don't know. We have a pretty good gut feeling that most of the play calls are Frost, but we also can't say that for certainty without them telling us exactly how it breaks down. But I think for myself, some of it is, and we've heard a little bit about this, about simplifying the playbook, but I don't know if it's even that. I think sometimes when they talk about simplifying the playbook, it's because for whatever reason, they're basically saying that individual doesn't know enough of the playbook to be able to do it. What I'm talking about when I say simplify is, let's take Minnesota, for example. And now this is in to use this word again, oversimplifying it, because obviously they go into halftime, Minnesota makes some adjustments. They're starting to get some different looks, and Nebraska has to adjust as well. But you have a quarterback in Adrian Martinez who is doing all right running the ball against Minnesota. We know Minnesota is a team that can be run against, at least this year. He's not successful in the big passes downfield, but he's doing all right with the shorter, quicker passes. Things are, to use your word, cooking a little bit. And then things shift in a way that I don't quite understand. Maybe they were searching for those explosive plays. And so maybe that because of that, they were almost overreaching what they needed to do. I just think in that case, maybe go back to the basics, go back to the fact that, running the ball against Minnesota on a day it's very cold and windy is not a bad thing. It just sometimes feels like Nebraska is trying to force something that maybe it isn't at that moment. So just simplify it a little bit more. And if it's not working the way that maybe you wanted it to, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It just means for whatever reason, it's not working in that way today. It just feels like sometimes this offense gets stuck on trying to do the things over and over to try to make them work, where it's like, but why? If something else is working, or if you can adjust and make something else fit what you need in the moment, just keep going. Maybe that wouldn't have helped Nebraska against Minnesota, but that was just something I kept feeling is it felt like they went away from the thing that was working. Now I understand Minnesota adjusted a little bit at halftime, but at the same time, why completely abandon what's working for you in favor of whatever else they were trying to do? And again, I don't know. If I had the answers to like how you simplify that, I would be coaching, but I guess it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but they're probably trying to figure that out themselves.
Sure. Play calling has been something that's been questioned so much this year. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too, because I'm sure I've done it in the moment. Play calling is so easy to question on game day when the play's not working. It's so easy to sit there and say, like on a cold, windy Saturday against Minnesota, why won't you run the ball? Their run defense sucks. Run the ball more. But they really do believe that the swing pass is an extension of their run game.
You love the swing pass. It's your favorite.
That's what they feel. And in theory, if you get Wandel Robinson the ball, if you've got numbers, it works, right? Like the touchdown they had to Wyatt Lever was essentially a swing pass where they shifted the field, got numbers in their advantage, and then threw it to Wyatt Lever and did what they were supposed to do, and they scored. Mm-hmm. And like the thing that is so frustrating about this offense, and you hear Austin Allen talk about it on Monday, and you hear Frost talk about it every single week, and I know nobody wants to talk about this anymore, but like you see it working, and then all of a sudden it just breaks, and it's hard to explain. Perfect example is the swing pass, because the first two starts for Adrian Martinez after he came back off the bench for Luke McCaffrey, he was hitting the thing perfectly. And that wasn't something that he was doing before. He was hitting it on target, in stride for guys that were catching it, be it Wandel Robinson, receivers on a screen pass or a tunnel screen or whatever, or a running back. He was hitting them in stride, and they were getting 4, 5, 6 yards, upwards of 15, sometimes 20 yards. Because that's what those plays are designed to do. And when you put the ball in the right place initially, you set your guy up to be able to do that. Now, we could talk about the wind on the first play of the game. They said that it was not an issue. Frost and Martinez said after the game that it was not an issue, that it wasn't noticeable on the field. We weren't there, so we can't argue with them. But
we were there, but we were inside. So
right, we were inside. We were not. And I do wonder. I think one of the cool stories that's going to come, probably from a national person, is like what the absence of fans did to like the dynamics on the field when you talk about wind. Is it maybe like a little bit of a vortex effect in there without any fans, and maybe you get wind whipping around at the bottom? I don't know. But like so that first pass, it's not on target. And Wandel should catch the ball, but it's not on target. And suddenly now everything goes downhill. And it's things like that it broke at a terrible moment. And that seems to continue to happen to them. And it's simple things that we've seen them execute before. And I think that's what makes this offense so like maddening to figure out. And what makes this discussion such a long one of how do you fix the offense heading into next year is because like we can look at the talent. They got talent. They got a lot of talent. We could start looking at what they're going to have next year. They could have 2 4-star, high 4-star, could have been 5-star tackles at left tackle and right tackle, and Turner Corcoran and Bryce Benhart. Cam Jurgens was a 4-star. Thomas Fidone, who is not coming to Nebraska to ride the bench. All due respect to Austin Allen. He ain't coming.
I thought you were about to say he's not coming to Nebraska. Now, by the time people listen to this, they will know that if, he has signed or not, but I got real nervous for a second.
Don't scare anybody.
Don't do that.
He should be a 5-star. He's not coming here to ride the bench. He's going to play. You got Wandel Robinson. You got Xavier Betts. I wrote down in my notes, assuming no attrition, next year's offense will have 4 of the 20 highest rated recruits that Nebraska has signed in the 247 era. 4 of the 20.
And that's
Turner
obviously
Corcoran,
assuming no attrition.
Yeah. Turner Corcoran, Thomas Fidone, Wandel Robinson, and Xavier Betts. 4 of the 20 highest rated recruits in the 247 era will be on this offense next season. Talent's not an issue.
No, and I think, and Derek, I want to just say really quick, I think you're right. And I think that's why I always hesitate with play calling, because I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying like the play calling needs to be better, or I understand exactly what's happening. I think for myself, and a fair question, is I don't think questioning, I think there's 2 different ways to look at play calling. You can question a little bit of like the decision making. What were you seeing? Why did you maybe go away from the thing that was working? What challenged you there? But I mean, there have been some, just thinking of Minnesota alone, we questioned why did Frost take the ball to start the game when it seems like he's been more successful when he has the ball to start the second half. So, and
when one of his starting wide receivers said he prefers to start the game with the defense coming out first, getting a stop, and then they get the ball to start the second half.
Yeah.
That was a question that I had, certainly. Yeah.
I think when we talk about play calling, I want to be careful. Like I'm not Matt Lubick. I'm not Scott Frost. They're much smarter at this than I am, or else I would have the job. So like, I always want to be careful with that, because whereas I'm questioning, I think for me, I just like, I want to understand, like, what did you see that changed it? And maybe they walked away from it and said, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have. Who knows? Like, unless you're physically present with them and having those conversations afterwards, you just don't know. I think it's fair to question some of some of the decision making is maybe the better way to say it, is not even so much the play calling. It's just more of the decision making. But that's just because for me, it's like, I kind of just want to understand why did you choose that path, I guess.
Yeah. You can certainly question why Dedrick Mills only gets 12 carries.
Right.
That seems to be like his handcuff, and it's kind of hard to explain. Brandon, do you like youth as an excuse? And is it an excuse that Nebraska is going to be able to use in a year 4 under Scott Frost? Because if you just project out this offense, Turner Corcoran, if he starts at left tackle, he'd be a freshman and this would all be like by the way NCAA views eligibility. Turner Corcoran, a freshman. Ethan Piper, still a freshman. Cam Jurgens, still a sophomore. Who goes at right guard? I don't know. Bryce Benhart, still a freshman. Fidone would be a true freshman, a first-year freshman. Wandel Robinson would still be a sophomore. Xavier Betts would still be a freshman. At running back, they'd either have Savion Morrison, Marvin Scott, Ramir Johnson, Ronald Tompkins. I don't know if Dedrick Mills is going to come back. I'm not going to include him in it just because all the seniors, it seems like they've talked about how this was like their last game at Memorial Stadium. But all 4 of those other running backs, they would all still be freshmen in the NCAA's eyes. So this projects as an incredibly young offense next season, even more so than it was this season. Is that an excuse? And is that an excuse that you can use, or a crutch that you can lean on in your 4th year as the head coach of a program?
I think inexperience is a factor. The bigger issue is that there's the excuse kind of changes week to week, right? It's always something. This week it might be, well, we're still a young team, which they are, but we see, part of the reason that there's so much, I guess, consternation or over where Nebraska's at as a program is that the last really 2 decades of college football have conditioned us to think like the turnaround happens quick or it doesn't happen at all. And, there are countless examples you can talk about there. In the December issue, I wrote a little bit about that, from 2000 to 2010, like I think every coach that won a national title was in his first 4 years there. When you take out some of the repeats, like Urban Meyer, obviously, but like the trend lately has been, it happens really quickly. So yes, it would be better. And Frost actually talks about getting old as a team and being experienced more than I probably thought he would. And I think that's a reflection of, well, things have gone more slowly than they anticipated. So, yeah, there's some of that in there, but when you get to the off season, it's really a matter of, okay, Bryce Benhart might still be a sophomore next year, but he played a lot of football. It's like, you can be young, you can be an underclassman and be pretty experienced. Wandel Robinson had plenty of experience coming into this year. So you can't write it off totally, but does it work as an excuse? No, I don't think so. Particularly when Nebraska's attrition rate has been so high that, okay, even if those guys are playing as young players, there's no guarantee they're going to be here 2-3 seasons down the road. So that's another issue for the Huskers.
That's one thing I'm very worried about, is that we get into January or February and suddenly, you're losing guys again because things aren't going the way anybody thought it was going to go. And then suddenly you are a young team, because you can look at the roster management of the first 3 years and you can say like, well, I mean, there's an alternate reality where you're actually an old team right now. If you look at the guy that's leading Oregon State in tackles at linebacker, or, there's a wide receiver, and he didn't have a good year at TCU, but there's a wide receiver that would have owned every single Nebraska receiving record if he'd stayed for his last year. So there are guys elsewhere that you can look at and say, well, if they were still here, this wouldn't necessarily be such a young team. But that's a little bit revisionist. And like, to your point, like, yes, Bryce Benhart will only still be a redshirt freshman by eligibility, and Juergens will only be a sophomore by eligibility, but like Juergens will be going into his 4th year here at the school. Benhart will be going into his 3rd year. They've been around for a while. So I am curious to see how that kind of works. And another thing I'm curious about too is if, because of that situation that they might potentially be in, if on Friday we see more young guys. We're going to see Turner Corcoran without Brendan Hymas in the picture. Do we see more of Xavier Betts, more of Alante Brown, who hasn't really gotten a ton of burn at wide receiver? He's their primary kick returner, but not a ton of snaps for him at wide receiver throughout the season. Do we see somebody like him? Do we finally get to see Savion Morrison's debut? I'm curious about something like that. Erin, would you play it that way, or would you say, no, we got to win a game. We got to win a football game?
Oh, I mean, I think they have to win a football game. And the reason I say that is I think going into what will be the longest offseason of Nebraska history, which, I mean, the 2020 offseason felt long, but this one I feel like is going to be excruciatingly painful, especially when we think about the fact that, like, it'll be, when this game is done, we're talking like months before we hear from them again. And even then, when you get into spring football, like, I don't know how much availability and access we'll have with COVID-19 protocols. We don't know what that will look like. So, I mean, we're talking, it's going to be a long off season. And when you think of like what a win could do, just one win doesn't mean anything. Like, in the big scheme of things, it's not like one win over Rutgers is going to suddenly change the trajectory of this entire program and save everything and everyone from themselves. But it can do a lot to at least like build some momentum going into a new year, where you can at least feel a little bit good about what you showed and take that, just those good vibes. Sometimes just feeling good goes a long way. So, I mean, I think that while there's some benefit to like, yeah, let's just play whomever we want and just let them get experience and like roll with that, I would certainly understand it. But I think if I'm I think if I'm the head coach, I'm just trying to get a win, because I think if you can get a win and get a very like good win, like let's say they beat Rutgers by a touchdown or two, like it's not a 3-point game. It's not coming down to the wire. You actually really win this game. I think then at least like, no, you're not like writing letters to recruits that are like, look at that win over Rutgers, but at least you feel like we've taken something into the offseason that we can feel okay about.
Yeah, for as little interest, I guess, as there may be around this game. I mean, it's Friday night now instead of random Friday afternoon game. So maybe that helps a little bit. At least people won't be literally at work. So that helps. But it feels like kind of a high stakes game against for a game between a 2-win Nebraska team and a 3-win Rutgers team. And yes, Rutgers is better. But it's still the program, there's still an association with Rutgers based on the past, well, really their entire time in the Big Ten up to this point. Like Greg Schiano has made them look at least competent to a degree they haven't ever since joining the Big Ten in 2014.
Well, there's a perception of them, and that's why they brought in Greg Schiano in part, was because he was going to be a guy, he was a big name that was going to be able to fight that perception, which was a thing that he was going to have to do.
Yeah, and he's done a really remarkable job. Like Rutgers offensively, it's still a struggle, but defensively they've made some pretty strong gains, and maybe that's not a total surprise. Like Schiano's a defensive guy; he's a good defensive football coach, and also Chris Ash, for as bad as that Rutgers era went, he got fired there and then became defensive coordinator at Texas. Like that guy can coach some football too. It's just There's no kind of ready-made angles for Nebraska in this one. You got to go to New Jersey on a short week. It's going to be cold. There's going to be potentially 1.5 feet of snow piled up around the field. And it's the end of the year, which is always tough. Another year that hasn't gone as Nebraska has wanted it. Can you go out and play well in those conditions? And I think, yes, you beat Rutgers. It's not like, well, that's a springboard to 2021. But they do need, like, losing that game, I think, is a big issue as you turn the page to the season to come. Like going into the season, having lost to Rutgers to end the year on a cold Friday night in New Jersey. No, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I just think about, here's the thing, a win over Rutgers is not going to take all the scrutiny that Frost has faced this season away. But it certainly gives your players something to feel a little bit good about. And I think that goes a long way. We've talked about just the mentality of this team, and I just feel like they're so fractured in that mentality. And I don't think a win over Rutgers is going to necessarily glue that all back together, but it definitely would do more for it than it would if they, managed to lose this one.
Yeah, I definitely think that a loss can do more damage than a win can do good. And I wonder, one of the storylines we heard this week was how much everybody from the top down still believes inside Nebraska's walls that things are going to turn. I wonder how much just sheer belief in what you're doing plays a part in fixing some of the problems that they've had. Because like when it's hard to put a finger on what's causing the issue, maybe just sheer belief helps you maybe break through a wall that you don't necessarily know how to get through, or a door that you don't necessarily you don't know what the key is to it. Maybe. I don't know. Brandon, I have some numbers that I would like to share, and I would like to ask you to tell me what they mean. Nebraska, from a points per play standpoint, and I feel like depending on where you get stuff, like numbers can differentiate a little bit. If I have stuff wrong and you have something different, feel free to tell me. But from a points per play standpoint, Nebraska's offense from 2019 has gone from 69th nationally to 99th nationally. They've gone down. Red zone touchdown percentage in 2019, they were 100th. Nationally, they've dropped to 113th. They went from 52.9% down to 48.4%. So they're not scoring as many touchdowns in the red zone. Third down percentage has dropped off a cliff. They went from 50th a year ago at 51.2% to this year they're 107th at 33.3%. Bad on third downs. Yards per pass has also dropped off a cliff, 7.9 in 2019, down to 6.3. They were 44th nationally in 2019. Now they're down to 100th. Points per scoring opportunity has gone down as well, from 83rd nationally to 100th nationally. But all of that said, and again, maybe you have a different number. If you do, let me know. Success rate, when I was looking at it, has gone up from 42.2% in 2019. That was 67th to 45.96, 46.0% if you're rounding up, which would be 30th nationally. So we've talked about explosiveness. Penalties was an issue early on. They're worse on a per play efficiency in terms of scoring points. They're worse in the red zone. They're worse on third down, but their success rate is 30th nationally. How does that work? Can you help explain that?
Yeah. So it's kind of the story of Nebraska football for the last 3 years. Like the success rate has always been strong. And so one of the things with this year in particular, and this has been true since week 1, and it hasn't really budged a bunch, is so success rate, all plays. You can also break into standard downs and passing downs, which is just like 2nd and 6 is a standard down, 2nd and 7 is a passing down. It has nothing to do with the play that's actually run. It's just kind of, can the defense expect you to pass? Nebraska is really, really strong. They're even better than the number you mentioned, top 30 in overall success rate. They're top 10 on standard downs. So when it's 2nd and 4 or 3rd and 3, like strong, they get into passing downs and they're 112th or 113th nationally. So they're a team that needs to stay ahead of schedule to survive. Some of the numbers that you specifically mentioned, and I think so this, like, and I know people are kind of tired of hearing it, or at least that's my sense of, Frost and the players really kind of drove it home this week too, in their comments saying, we're close. So the third down, well, okay, you're talking about, you could run 2 successful plays. You could gain 5 yards on first down and then 3 on second. If you are unsuccessful on 3rd and 2, well, that hurts your third down conversion percentage. Doesn't really dent, your success rate that much. So there's part of that. Also the red zone. So that's a specific, we're talking about 20 yards and in. So you could be good in success rate all the way down to the 20-yard line. In fact, you probably need to be pretty good to get down there against your standard Big Ten defense. But if you come up short there, that's that. And if you come up short there, you're getting 3 points, hopefully. But you're not getting 7. So your points per play is hurt. It goes down. It's those things. Like, they do so much of the work to, like, you work a full day, and then you get down to the last 15 minutes and you screw something up, and it feels like the whole work day can be shot. And that's kind of where Nebraska has been under Frost, which is why, as someone who kind of looks numbers first in a specific set of numbers that I kind of trust to tell me, like, how well is this team actually playing? A lot of that's really positive. So I tend to be on Frost and the team's side more when they say we're close, because where they're really bad right now are like a handful of plays. It came up on Tuesday. They're talking about 3, 4, 5 plays, which gets frustrating because 3 years in, is there any sign that that's changing? And that's the big missing piece.
One of the things that was said Monday that caught a lot of eyeballs, certainly caught my eye, or I guess like caught my ear, I guess more since it was said, is when Austin Allen said the offense is designed for things to work when all 11 guys do their job, and it's not going to work when only 10 guys do their job. Like, why that's the case. Is that normal? That's all a big, long discussion we can have out some other day. But it kind of got me thinking. It makes sense to help kind of illustrate or I guess explain what we're seeing on Saturdays. And then I had somebody say to me, is it the one guy not doing his job? Is it the same guy over and over and over again? It is the thing that is holding back this offense, quarterback play, is kind of the thing that everybody just kind of circles around. We're here. We got to talk to these guys every single day, so we can't do kind of the national thing where we drop in and say, oh yeah, your quarterback sucks, and then drop out and not have to deal with the consequences. We got to look at it a little bit kind of more holistically than that. I love Adrian. I think he's a wonderful young man. I think he's a wonderful leader. I think he's a wonderful captain. But I think the question is fair at this point. Is the thing that is holding this offense back quarterback play? And not necessarily putting Luke in, because I think we've seen this year that Luke is not ready, is a switch at quarterback. If that quarterback is an upgrade, does that suddenly just fix everything? Either of you guys can answer this first.
I don't know. I think
this is a tough question. It's a tough question. Because if it was easy to answer, they would have switched quarterbacks and they would have put somebody different in, or they would be bringing somebody different in, which they might not do.
And
it's a tough question.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, like when we go back to decision making, one thing I have a lot of questions about is the evaluation of Nebraska's quarterbacks, because we heard for so long that, they're so close, they're testing so close to one another, and this is neither here nor there. I don't think it necessarily speaks volumes about Luke McCaffrey long term, but like he and Adrian, I don't think are testing at. I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess, like, could I see the test? What they're doing to get they're all things are equal? Because, I mean, what you really have right now is you have one quarterback in Adrian who he's hit and miss on decision making, but he typically has a little bit more composure about him. So there's that piece that he goes out there, has a little bit more composure, isn't able to really throw downfield, which is frustrating to people, but seems to be all right at running the ball and can make some of those shorter, quick passes. But then you have Luke, who sometimes, in the way that I described him, he looks like a Tasmanian devil right now. He's just very chaotic in how he runs things. There's nothing wrong with that. That is youthfulness, to be clear. Like, he just looks chaotic. But he's fast. But his throwing is questionable. But again, so is Adrian's throwing. And then we're all sitting here calling for Logan Smothers, but it's like, do you even like go down that? And I'm not saying like we all, like, just the greater you hear on, like, people are like, just throw him in there, see what happens. And it's like, but is that what you do? Like, I guess, like, we know that Luke McCaffrey is the future, is what Frost said. But can you reasonably unseat Adrian for Luke by next season? If all things stay the same, they don't get any new quarterbacks, nothing happens. We know Mackenzie Milton is going to Florida State, so that ship has sailed.
Charlie Brewer's in the transfer portal.
I mean, I guess you could, like, I guess Luke could.
I don't think they're going to.
But I don't think you can, because unless it's a significant jump, Adrian has showed that he can run this offense mostly. But the question is like, my question is what would Adrian the quarterback be if some of those things around him were working a little bit differently? I don't know. Like, I think you need a near perfect quarterback this season to have handled it a little bit differently. Because when you're getting sacked by your own teammate's butt, Like, I don't know at that point what you're supposed to do.
The thing that makes this difficult is a year ago, it was hard to fully evaluate Adrian because the stuff around him wasn't working. This year, the stuff around him is working a little bit better. Now, the offensive line has not been as consistent, but we all see this on Saturdays. Wide receivers are open. This stuff is working a little bit better, but how much does line play factor in? Brandon, where are you at with this?
Adrian's one of Nebraska's 3 or 4 best players. I don't think there's a ton of argument to be made otherwise, beyond the kind of standard thing of the quarterback always gets the most attention. His failures are the most kind of forward facing. Like when the quarterback screws up, everybody knows it. But I think what we've seen with the level Adrian has played over the past 3 years, it's not enough for Nebraska to be better. Well, it's not good enough for Nebraska to have a winning record yet, which is bizarre. I think Adrian has played, for the most part, has played at a higher level than what Nebraska's record actually is to this point. So it's a tough question because it's like, yeah, kind of like Erin said, if there's a magic transfer out there, whoever it may be, and you're like, if we get this guy, we guarantee he's going to perform at a like 98th percentile level for all quarterbacks in college football. Like, I think that would help. Like you make maybe 2 more throws in terms of those 2 big play passes that were there that were just missed in the second or the first half against Minnesota. And maybe that's different. But, you know, the level around Adrian, like the level of Nebraska just needs to rise overall. So even if Adrian was much, much better, yeah, maybe it helps. Maybe you get another 2 or 3 wins over the course of all of the games that he's played. But I don't think it's the sole reason that Nebraska is at where it's at right now. Like you just look at into that Minnesota game, you know, 4 minutes left and they're up a touchdown. And what do? They give it to Mo Ibrahim, their best player. Everyone knows what's coming. And they're just like, well, it's time to go win this game. And we're going to give it to our best guy who was dinged up, who didn't play much in that game, really, after he got hurt early. And they just gave it to him and he made plays. Who is that player, or who are the 2 or 3 candidates to be that player on Nebraska right now? Wandel Robinson is probably the closest, but they don't have that.
Maybe
he has had the strangest season. He doesn't have a touchdown yet this year.
That's so weird. I was going to say one thing too, you could almost put Adrian in that category, Brandon, of like, I guess a player that could, like we saw that when he was making the comeback. What game was that? Where he got butt sacked?
Iowa.
The Iowa game thing.
Or was it?
Yeah.
Purdue?
Sorry. My brain was like not like placing this game. Like I couldn't see the field for some reason. I was even at that Iowa game. But like you have this moment of like, all right, taking charge, we're coming down the field, it's going to happen. And then your offensive lineman, gets blown by you. And like, I mean, and you're just immediately sacked and there's nothing you can do. And I remember he just laid there on the ground for a minute. And part of me was like, did he just get injured? But he was just, I think in his that moment where it's like, that was it. But everything else just kind of fell apart. And that's the key is when you hear that from Austin Allen of like, we're not at like everything has to work correctly for like their margin for error is so small. And so what it's saying is if one offensive lineman doesn't do his job, it can't be recovered from at that moment. It's just somebody else might be able to get away from that. Not Nebraska. That's going to just collapse in front of them.
Yeah, I think that margin being so small factors into some of the play calling discussion too that we were talking about earlier. To go back to the Hoiberg and a basketball analogy, like I think we all probably agree that quote unquote, the scheme works, right? Like their receivers are open consistently. Like we've seen the run game work. The success rate is high, for a team that is as limited as Nebraska is right now in some ways. For it to be that high kind of tells you like, yeah, when it comes to moving chess pieces on the chessboard, the coaching staff still remains pretty good, particularly on offense. But it reminds me a little bit of, these missed passes or these runs that if you break one more tackle or make one different cut, it goes for 40 yards instead of 7. It feels a lot to me, and Derek is the resident hoop head here, so I'll be interested in what he thinks. It feels a lot to me like Nebraska's getting good looks. Like, okay, that was a corner 3. We'll take that every time we can get it. We got to make the shot. And Nebraska 3 years in still isn't making the shot consistently enough. Like they're happy with what they're getting. It's working for the most part, the way they have designed it to work, the way they want it to work. But sooner or later, you gotta make the shot. Fred Hoiberg, his career's not going to be defined by, well, Nebraska won 25% of its games, but man, it created a ton of good looks. And I think that's kind of Nebraska football to this point.
That's a good analogy. I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think some of the hubbub about Fred Hoiberg's offense right now is way too premature. They are playing the way, just on paper, they're playing the way he wants them to play. They're just missing shots. And this is a brand new rotation. So and again, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but I've seen it this week. And it's way too early for that. I don't think there is a Justin Fields, Joe Burrow level transfer in this market right now. Now, with the way that the portal is like booming, maybe in 36 hours that'll change. But currently, I don't think that there's a Justin Fields or a Joe Burrow in the transfer portal. I don't even think there's like a Jamie Newman type in the transfer portal. I don't think Nebraska's going to go there, at least for a quarterback.
I mean,
so
to be fair with the quarterback situation in the transfer portal, and I have to just say this about Joe Burrow really quick, that you had no idea, LSU had no idea that Joe Burrow was going to, like, that was lightning in a bottle, and good for them for what they got. But like, I think we've taken Frost, and I'm not saying that you're doing this, by the way. I'm just saying for fans who go down this path, I think we've taken Frost a little too out of context with is he better than what I have? Because at the time he was looking at Adrian as all the future of Nebraska football. And so the question that you have to ask is like, is Joe Burrow, with what we know, is that something that we need to go really sincerely pursue, or do we feel better about the option that we have right now? So that would be the question again with the transfer portal is there somebody that is better than what you feel you have right now? And the answer is maybe, but the reality is you don't know.
And at the end of 2018, it looked like Nebraska got the better end of that deal. I mean, Joe Burrow, I think from a QBR standpoint, was a little bit better than Adrian, but Adrian was a true freshman. You're like, okay, well, quarterback's set for the next however many years. Like Joe Burrow had a nice season, and then he went out with a new offensive coordinator and had like the greatest passing season anyone has seen in college football history. And with where LSU's trending now, here's a prediction that's going to feel like the Cam Newton, Gene Chizik national title at Auburn. Like LSU's in a little bit better spot than Auburn was. And I think Ed Orgeron's a better coach than Gene Chizik was, but not by leaps and bounds. Sorry, that was bizarre LSU take inserted
that was
in the middle
good.
of this Nebraska podcast.
That was good. You also hit the Joe Brady bingo, which his name doesn't come up enough when talking about that 2019 LSU team.
No one can see this because they can't see us, but if you could, it did look like you were marking off a bingo card. I just want to point out, you like went down and it looked like you checked off something on the bingo card.
Brandon, I have a one quick question for you, and then we'll let you guys get out of here. You said that Adrian is third or fourth best player on the team, or top 3 or 4 best players on the team. If you took away his ability to run, you told him you have to sit in the pocket on pass plays. You can still have the quarterback power play, the design quarterback run stuff, but on pass plays, you have to sit in the pocket. You have to throw the ball. You cannot scramble. Is he still a top 3 or 4 guy?
No, probably not. I mean, I think he drops a little bit, but he's not a terrible passer. He just can't quite, or hasn't shown the ability yet to make every throw that I think this offense needs him to make. So if that were the case and you really were to, okay, like we're going to focus on these passing plays because we know we can execute these. These are throws that are made consistently. Like I still think Nebraska is capable of moving the ball that way. Is he one of the 3 or 4 best players on the team at that point? No, probably not. I mean, I think back to that touchdown run he had against Purdue. That's when he looks like, which was, if I recall, that was a design pass. I don't. Either way, it was a hell of a run for him to find the end zone. Like that was an individual play on his part. And that really is his strength. So you take the ability for that out of it. Yeah, he drops on the list, but he's probably still in the top 10 for me.
One of the issues is that let's whittle this down to the pass plays that we know we can complete. That's kind of where they're at now. And we see 10 guys in the box on Saturdays, and they have no deep shot, which kind of gets back to what we opened with, which was you talking about explosiveness. So that position could potentially be in flux this offseason. It could potentially not. It could be Adrian again. We'll see. Quarterback will probably once again be one of the most talked about and dissected positions for Nebraska heading into the new season. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting because, the how do you fix this offense question will be asked ad nauseum over this offseason. And I think as we've kind of found as we've worked our way through this, is it's not an easy question to answer.
No, so, a lot of those numbers that you mentioned earlier, the red zone, third downs, points per trip, et cetera. Like, I think a lot of that too is chalked up to what you just said. They can't challenge people downfield consistently, and they don't have receivers that scare an opposing defense right now, which isn't to, downplay any of the talent at that spot right now. That Nebraska just hasn't shown the ability to do it. And we're heading into game 8. And if you have not shown the ability to make teams pay, it becomes really easy to kind of load up against the best weapon, which is, either quarterback in there running the football, which is its own separate thing.
And some of their wide receiver talent isn't even on the field. So we'll see. Certainly a lot to talk about. We could go for probably another couple hours, but you guys got to go. I'm sure you got work to do. I gotta jump on something else. So thank you guys both for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week with another podcast. In the meantime, keep reading HailVarsity.com. We'll have coverage on football, men's basketball, women's basketball, everything all through the weekend. Listen to Brandon's podcast, the ID Preview Pod. Listen to Aaron and Sasha's podcast, the Mind Run podcast. Everything else you can find HailVarsity.com/network. Shout out to Sasha for producing this today. Thanks to Brandon and Aaron for coming on one more time. And then thanks to all you guys for listening every week. So hit the subscribe button, and we'll talk to you next week.